it's time to get started. It's my pleasure to introduce a great friend to the Chamber and to Arizona's business community, Jim Pratt, the General Manager and CEO of SRP. With 40 years in the utility industry, Jim is a seasoned expert who's helped guide Arizona's energy sector through tremendous growth and innovation. He's one of the state's most trusted leaders in the energy space. And I have to tell you, as we get ready for another summer, he's the one who keeps your ACs running and your power on, and we don't have any of those nasty brownouts or blackouts like they have in California and Texas. So on that note, please join me in welcoming to the stage Jim Pratt.
Well, thank you very much, Danny. I appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for taking time to come out. What an amazing turnout. Obviously, it's not for you to see Danny. I know that, as much as he might think so. I think there's a few other special guests. You know, I want to start off by just mentioning that I know SRP is very proud to be a partner with the Chamber. I look at what the Chamber does for all of us in terms of the business community and the ties that the Chamber makes for us to the elected officials, who we have many of them here today, which is fantastic. When you think about that and how important it is, it's truly critical to the state. And I think we've got a great lineup today of things that you're going to hear. I think that it's important to recognize, and it's probably not a surprise, obviously, to any of you, that when you look at what I would call some very critical times at the moment, what would really be an unprecedented amount of change and controversy, things going on, not just only in our nation, but on a global basis. This is why it's important to have these relationships. You know, I know when I look at our business, our goal in life really is, our mission is to make sure that we're able to provide the water and the energy that not just our residential customers need, but our business community, all of our communities that we serve. And that is very important to what we do, which is the same for many of you that are in this room. And so when I was preparing for this and I was thinking about it, you recognize that we do not accomplish those things on our own. You need a lot of support from our elected officials. And I think one of the things the Chamber helps us do is to stay in lockstep. So I thought about 3 very high-level examples I thought I would give you that is a direct tie, and I think it really just highlights how important that relationship is. Danny started to comment earlier a little bit about, quite frankly, what Senator Kelly did recently in terms of having the EPA come out and meet with us to talk about the ozone non-attainment issue. Some of you in this room know that very, very well. The part that I would highlight is, one, the senator taking that action, and literally within a couple of weeks, EPA took action to try to help us. And that's almost unprecedented. Yep. I know for us specifically, we also had a recent issue ourselves where Congressman Crane bailed us out significantly to help us be able to ensure that we've got the energy that we need to deliver the AC that Danny talked about a minute ago, right? To be able to serve load this summer. Same thing. That was another example of something that happened within just a couple of weeks. And then when you consider where I work, right, I can't help but not talk about water, of course, which is obviously critical to all of us. But when I think about the issues that we have going on where we're trying to increase our storage capacity, develop more energy from the water resources that we have today, things of that nature, the entire Arizona delegation has done nothing but support us in those efforts. And those things that we're trying to get across the finish line, they would not be possible without that level of support. And I really do mean that. It just would not happen. So I want you to please take a moment and give a round of applause for all of our House of Representatives and Senators that are here today. I think it's just a tremendous way of highlighting what can happen when the business community and our elected officials are on the same page and we're working together. So I will just close with basically highlighting once again what the Chamber does for us to be able to make that happen and to help support that bridge, and also thank all of our elected officials again. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage EPCOR's Senior Vice President of Regulated U.S. Water, Sean Bradford.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure to join you today at the Arizona Chamber's annual Update from Capitol Hill Luncheon. And on behalf of EPCOR, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be part of this important event and to introduce our congressional leaders. So I know you all want to hear from our members of Congress on various issues impacting our home state, so I'm not going to be up here for very long. However, I do want to touch on a few high points. So at EPCOR, we're proud to provide service to over 400,000 people across Arizona with reliable water and wastewater services. And as the state's largest regulated water utility, we're committed to ensuring that Arizona's infrastructure grows sustainably and responsibly. In just over a decade, EPCOR has already invested over $2.8 billion into infrastructure across the southwestern U.S., with most of that here in Arizona. And I'm proud to say that our team reuses and recharges over 96% of the water that we receive and clean. And as an organization, we've been recognized with over 300 safety and operational excellence awards. So we know that Arizona's continued growth depends on smart federal and state partnerships. And we're proud to support the Chamber's work in advancing policies that empower our communities and job creators. So now it's my honor to introduce today's congressional panel. So we've got Congressman Juan Ciscomani representing Arizona's 6th Congressional District, Congressman Andy Biggs, who represents the 5th Congressional District, Congressman Eli Crane, representing the 2nd Congressional District, and Congressman Abe Hamadeh, who represents the 8th Congressional District. So please join me in welcoming our panelists.
All right. Well, thank you for coming today. Definitely not a lot that you do on anyone's minds out there, so it should be a relatively easy panel. No, I'm kidding, and I know there's a lot to get through, so we're going to jump right in, and I'll go ahead and start with you, Congressman Biggs. Many here in this room knew you during your time in the state legislature, and we know you to be one of the most well-read people that we've ever spoken to, and you've long been a strong free market conservative, and we've been watching the constant change of impact from tariffs. And recently you said you've evolved on this topic. Here at the Chamber, we kind of want to understand, where do you see this going? Explain to us your evolution on that, and maybe put us all at ease on what the end goal is and how this all plays out. Easy question.
Is this microphone on? Is there? Thank you for the question. I told Juan I was gonna give him all questions like that. So Juan, So you ask about my evolution on this. So I was a Ricardian for a long time as a young guy, and I believed that absolute free markets, total free markets, and I still believe in free markets. I believe free markets work, but when you have unfree markets that you're competing with and that you're actually trying to trade with, you lose any comparative advantage suggested by Ricardo, in my opinion. And so that's why I've kind of evolved on this, and there are places that have been cheating, quite frankly. Now, put a pin in that. The next step over is I come to this notion of how do you deal and respond to that, and there's any number of ways you can respond. Multilateral institutions don't really work, in my opinion. The reason they don't work is because when I was doing international work, see, Danny's just nodding his head, man. He's a good host. So when I did international work, what I found is that it's real hard for the U.S. to get a break, even though we're funding a lot of the multilaterals. So it was, if somebody was cheating on you, you had a hard time getting the proper reparations or retribution or restitution, whatever you needed to do to make things work. I think what's going to happen here, and one of the reasons that I've kind of evolved on this is, and then I went back and looked at some historical, when the U.S. did have tariffs before, and I wanted to check on that, and we actually were able to do some pretty good things while we had tariffs. The problem with that, though, is while we had tariffs, we also had really low income taxes, both business and individual, and that and that's, so we have a kind of a countervailing problem with that because our taxes are still too high there. But anyway, I see what's going to happen is there's a movement to devolve from multilaterals and move into bilateral relationships. And as we move into those bilateral relationships, I think you're going to see a move to reduce tariffs that are being imposed on our exports, as well as we'll come down as well. I think there's going to be some short-term pain for long-term gain. I don't like the short-term pain. Nobody does. But that's kind of a very, very simple explanation of how I've evolved on it. And if you'd like, I'll be happy to meet with any of you one-on-one and give you the full hour-and-a-half long rationale behind that, Danny.
Well, I appreciate that, and you heard the offer. I appreciate you taking the time to explain your evolution, because so many of us were in a camp on tariffs for so long, and I think we all believe that the goal of the administration is a good one. We just want to understand, how do we get there, what to expect along the way, how do we manage supply chain, how do we manage costs. So thank you for taking the time to be intellectually honest and explain your evolution to us in the crowd. We appreciate that. You know, I'll go ahead and we'll probably come back to you on some of that more later. I'm going to go to Congressman Crane now. And Congressman Crane, you heard from Jim Pratt earlier. You've been so good on natural resources. You have a district rich with them, and you've been so helpful to us. But one thing you've been in the news for a lot is kind of battling it out with federal judges who seem to be standing in the way of the administration's goals. And it's it's interesting, and it's something we haven't seen again in a while. It's kind of a revised tool to kind of push back against the judiciary. Do you have a concern, though, that if the Democrats were to ever take over, they would use that crutch against Republican-appointed judges as well? Like, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a possibility, but I do think it's a little ridiculous to see some of these federal judges really trying to usurp authority over the President of the United States, who was elected by the people of this country. Like in the instance that I drafted articles of impeachment against Paul Engelmeyer, he was basically trying to say that Elon Musk, Secretary Bessent, could not look at the data, look at the payments going out of the U.S. Treasury. Now, we have a lot of business owners in the room tonight. If you were brought in and you were tasked by your new CEO to run a company, but yet you were told that you couldn't bring in experts to look at all the data, the payments going out of a company, you would think that that's absolutely ridiculous. And keep in mind, President Trump didn't make any bones about the fact that he was going to root out fraud, waste, and abuse within every federal agency. So I think it's really dangerous when these judges are trying to stop the president, not only from rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse, but for doing exactly what he told the American people that he was going to do.
No, thanks for answering that. Congressman Hamadeh, you've been very busy as a new member of Congress. There's a lot we could talk about, but I want to first just ask for a round of applause. He's really championed the issue of lifting the DOJ oversight on the City of Phoenix Police, which is a huge cost to our enforcement. It's been hurt for recruitment, so yes, he deserves a big round of applause for taking that on. It means a lot to our members. We have several reserve members. But one thing you've been also very active on is the economy. From the moment he was elected, he's been reaching out to all the job creators in your district, in particular TSMC, which employs quite a few. What I am curious about is you're watching this kind of departure from things like the CHIPS and Science Act from this administration. Like, what are your views on economic development and what works and what could work for this industry? Because you care about national security, you care about jobs, care about veteran hiring. Again, been very active and very successful so far. Just curious what your views are.
Thank you, Danny. So when I first got in, I looked at my priorities, and of course the West Valley is growing so much, and we are very blessed to have a good state legislature that is quite overrepresented in a good way in the West Valley, because that's where a lot of the growth is going. And I'm very proud of President Trump. He's actually the one, if you look at who actually brought TSMC and a lot of these foreign investments here in the first place, that was President Trump and his Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. Rick Grinnell was also involved. So it's kind of interesting to see what Biden tried to take a lot of the credit. And now what you look at with President Trump announcing the $100 billion investment from TSMC, which is critical. And I've had conversations with President Trump. I want to make sure that these foreign companies who are coming into Arizona are also being good stewards of the community. That means we have to hire Americans. We have to hire veterans. You know, veterans are the toughest workers, and they know how to work long hours. So we don't want to see the community makeup change so much, especially when you have so much happening all at once. I'm very proud of what we're doing with the Phoenix Police Department, trying to get that ridiculous Biden DOJ report lifted. And I've been working with Kash Patel, Harmeet Dillon now, and Pam Bondi, so Attorney General Pam Bondi. I think it's in the works, but we have to make sure that we treat law enforcement well, because we have to remember over the past few years, especially under Joe Biden during the 2020, the summer of love, what they did to our law enforcement was a crisis. They try to destroy the rule of law, and they had a recruitment crisis on all of our law enforcement officers. Now I'm talking to so many police departments, they're saying that there's an increase, just like how it is with the military, so that's so significant right now. And I'm glad President Trump's in there and that we have a united Congress as well supporting President Trump's agenda.
No, thanks, Congressman Hamadeh. Great answer. I want to follow up on the, you're absolutely correct. We saw the initial onshoring and reshoring begin in President Trump's first term, and that was through programs like the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that lowered our corporate income tax rate for everyone. And I know that's a hot topic that's expiring, so I'll go ahead and just ask you, what do you see happening with that? Is that, as you head into reconciliation, as you go into May, how does looking at making those tax cuts permanent?
Yeah, and I know Congressman Biggs has a lot of experience because he was there in the first time around with the tax cuts. But I'm looking at Chairman Jason Smith of the Ways and Means Committee. He's doing a fantastic job. And right now, Speaker Johnson, all of leadership is actually. That's why you're seeing the House is much more united than people anticipated, right? They thought the Senate was going to be the easy way. But right now, the House is keeping it all together. But we have to wait and see. I know that there's concerns on many sides, but so far with President Trump, you know, he's the captain of this team, and it seems like he's letting everybody get a victory. And I know there's good leaders in Congress right now that's going to get it over the finish line very, very soon.
Thank you so much. All right, Congressman Ciscomani, I saved the easiest question, easiest topic for you. The Chamber Foundation recently produced a study that looked at the implications of federal cuts to Medicaid and how that would affect the Arizona budget and economy. I'm going to follow up with Congressman Biggs, who, based on recent polling, may inherit this mess if he chooses to come back and run the state one of these days. So let's start with you. You signed a letter with over a dozen of your fellow colleagues talking about the need to make very targeted reforms, but also a lot of concerns about what Medicaid cuts would do to a state like Arizona that has 2 million people on those rolls. You have in your representation, large percentages of each of the counties you represent seem to be Medicaid recipients. So, tell us about your concerns, what you see happening there, and as we head into May and reconciliation, what does this look like?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question, Danny. Yes, when you look at reconciliation and the conversations around that, a lot of it has been focused around some on the education stuff, but also a lot on the health and Medicaid and Medicare as well. That's why this has been one of the primary topics that we've been discussing, to first clear out a lot of the misconceptions or exaggerations from some people that want to pin on this, but at the same time understand that we have to stand up for these programs, the vitality of the programs, so that they can protect and serve the people that they were meant to protect and serve. Now, when we look at the federal government, the mandate was clear from the American public and in our state and in my district about rooting out the waste, the fraud, and the abuse in the federal government. And no agency, no department in the federal government is immune to seeing some of that. Over decades of, quite honestly, leadership on both sides of the aisle, the federal government has grown and the inefficiencies have also grown. What that does is that it puts at risk the vitality of these programs to serve the people that they were created to serve. We're talking about those in poverty, the single mothers, the elderly, the disabled. These are people that Medicaid was created to protect. And we got to make sure that we protect it. And the best way to do that is to make sure that we root out all the improper payments, that we root out all the waste, the abuse on that, and if there has been fraud, that we find it and we deal with that as well. So the letter that I wrote to the Speaker, along with 12 of my Republican colleagues as well, call for this. They put our position on paper on highlighting what we can support and what we cannot support on this. And when we look at these potential conversations on where the savings are going to come from, because this reconciliation process is all about making sure that we get our country back in fiscal order and in the right fiscal direction. Now, that cannot be done at the expense and on the backs of those that need Medicaid and that the program was created to protect and serve. Now, there have been abuses on that, and I think we all know that, and it needs to be cleaned up, and the proper reforms need to be supported so that we can protect it for those that need it the most. That is the main point of the letter. That is what we highlighted on there with 12 other Republicans. We've had very productive meetings and conversations with the Speaker. That was a public acknowledgement and a way to state my position, but I've been doing that over and over again in private settings as well. As an appropriator and the only appropriator in the Arizona delegation, both in the House and the Senate, I have a direct seat at the table on the spending conversations. We'll get to that in the summer for the FY26 budget, but right now it's all about reconciliation, and we got to make sure that we're protecting Medicaid for the people that need it the most. In my district, you're talking about 24% or so of the population in that. Let me tell you something about Speaker Johnson's district. He's ranked top 5 in the nation in Medicaid recipients in his district. So he's got a very specific and personal interest in protecting this as well. Last thing I'll say, President Trump has been very clear on this as well, of not touching Medicaid for the proper recipients in that as well. So there's unity in that among our side of the aisle, and we're going to make sure that we protect it.
Well, yeah. Congressman Biggs, you're familiar with Medicaid in our state. You're quite familiar with it. You were Senate President during some of the restoration. I know Governor Brewer's in the room, but I'll get in trouble if I call it expansion. So you were here for that. You were present. I mean, how do you see this playing out? And think about it. If you were to come back and you were to be elected governor, you might inherit a state with $3 billion less in its state budget as a result.
It's not like that didn't happen to me before, Danny, as a matter of fact. Yeah. Look, so what I anticipate happening at the federal level, and then I can get it down to the state level, is in the expansion population, which is the largest population within that group, is single, able-bodied adult males, right? And the FMAP for them is 90% fed to state. The FMAP for the population that for which Medicaid was intended, which is the disabled, the aged, the single moms, that's an FMAP of 70%. I don't know what they're going to do, but one of the things that they've suggested they're going to do is they're going to even that FMAP at 70%. We'll see if that happens, but no one's talking about reducing benefits, Medicaid, that I'm hearing. And so that's, we'll have to see where you have to see where the FMAPs fall at the end of the process. We may have a problem in the state when that comes, but believe me, we've dealt with those types of problems before. It's kind of the sad truth of the matter is I had the privilege of being the guy dealing with that problem when we lost 60% of our state revenue in about a 90-day period in 2008, 2009, if you recall. But we did have a good governor at the time, and we put our heads together and we made this thing work, and the state came out of it better. I'm hoping that when we get to reconciliation and it gets finished, that we don't have that kind of draconian impact on the state. But I'll just say this. It's important to understand that in reconciliation, we're trying to deal with a $2.25 trillion deficit every year. In 10 years, we're looking at a $60 trillion national debt. And that doesn't include things like a war, catastrophes that need federal assistance. It doesn't include any of that stuff. And that's why economists I'm talking to are saying they think it's going to be between $70 and $75 trillion if Congress does not address the problem. And the House program, it doesn't even get to 10% per year of that structural deficit, because it's a $2 trillion attempt to reduce funding over 10 years. That's $200 billion. That's not even 10% of our structural deficit every year. And so we've got a massive federal problem, and I'm afraid, quite frankly, that and I don't want to see it go this way, but it might get pushed in some respects down to the states. I hope it doesn't. But you'll see the reconciliation process go. Just to give you a timeline, we're doing, in the two committees that I sit on, we will be doing markups next week. Both those markups will exceed probably 14 hours apiece and go overtime. And then I don't know about Juan and Abe's, but I sit on one of the committees with Eli. But then by Memorial Day, the speaker said, we're going to have ours out of the House. I believe that's the case. I hope it's sooner. But what's important is we don't want to have, at the same time all this other stuff is happening, an incredibly high tax increase, which is exactly what would happen if we don't extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And so that's job one. And I'm not going to even get into it unless you ask specifically about what that means to the federal budget.
No, thank you, Congressman Biggs. And we know you know it very well and what it would mean for the state. I want to, go back to something that was said earlier. We all feel like Administrator Lee Zeldin has been a breath of fresh air in terms of allowing new regulatory paths forward, giving our businesses some certainty, some relief, some logic. Congressman Crane, you're so big into natural resources and in the production that goes into it. What else are the good stories we're not seeing as much of right now? Tell us what you're seeing that gets you excited when you talk about this new regulatory approach we're seeing out of the new administration.
Well, I think it's so important for Americans. I think it's so important for the economy, what this president is doing, and some of the people that he has brought in. One of the biggest issues up in my district right now is the concern of wildfires, because we've had a drought now for a couple decades. We didn't get a lot of rain this year. I was just, up in the White Mountains last week and going through and watching what the Forest Service and others are doing to mitigate, wildfires. But one of the, appointments that I, haven't got a chance to meet this guy yet, but that President Trump made for Forest Service used to work in the logging industry. And one of the issues within the Forest Service right now that a lot of people are concerned about is that, some of the leases that the Forest Service offers to some of these logging companies who come in and help thin the forest, which reduces the amount of fuel, they're not very long. And so you don't get some of these larger companies coming in with the capital to make investment to actually go through and really do a thorough job thinning some of these forests. And having somebody, at the top of Forest Service who actually worked in the logging industry, I think is going to be a breath of fresh air. And I also think some of the deregulatory policies that this president and his cabinet are working hard to implement are really going to help with that issue. I also got a chance to meet with, I think it was Secretary Wright of Energy, and I think that's a breath of fresh air too when you look at how this administration is going to go about tackling some of the energy issues that we've had. And when I talked to Secretary Wright, he said that his approach was all of the above. He's not trying to get rid of wind and solar, but they're also trying to keep coal going. They're also working on nuclear, and it's an all-of-the-above approach, and I think that's just going to be better for jobs in my district. I think it's going to be better for our economy, but I also think it's going to support much of the growth that you see coming into Arizona right now.
Thank you. And that's no puns intended. Lots of breath of fresh air coming from the president's regulatory environment. All four of you ran on border security and having a porous border, but I want to ask Congressman Hamadeh. I mean, we're seeing these numbers about what the crossings are, and they seem down. That all seems encouraging on that front. But do you feel like it's being felt in your district? Are you hearing it from your constituents that they feel like the border is more safe now?
Absolutely, and the data supports that. When you have President Trump in the first 90 days, now we have a reduction of 99% of border encounters. I mean, that's remarkable. And that didn't require a new bill to be done. It just required new leadership. And that's, it was always silly to me when I was, I'm a veteran, Eli's a veteran, when we couldn't, so often I heard people say, you can't use the military to secure a border. Every other country on earth uses their military to secure a border, especially when there's an invasion. When you have China purposely sending in the plague of fentanyl, teaming up with these drug cartel terrorists that are coming across our country. And for the last 4 years under Joe Biden, what we saw was total destruction on our southern border, and it affected so many communities in Arizona, but all across the country. I mean, I served with a congressman from Alaska. You saw fentanyl pouring in that way as well. So President Trump, and this is why I trust President Trump on tariffs. You know, we all compliment his great picks like Lee Zeldin as administrator. We all compliment Doug Burgum as Interior Secretary, who's just now announcing a huge copper investments here as well. President Trump knows what he's doing, and I'm here to support him because this is what he's done. He made America great again in his first term, and I know he's going to do it again once more.
Thank you. Congressman Ciscomani, how about you as a Southern Arizona rep? Are you feeling the effects of this new border policy?
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at the data that proves it, as Abe mentioned, but also when you meet with Border Patrol agents, you see the morale changing quite a bit from them. Eli's nodding his head. I think we meet with them quite often, and we go to church with many of them, or they drop off kids at our school as well. And just talking to their families, just the environment overall has shifted tremendously. Now, they also have a very realistic view to this, Danny. So when I visited last, I welcomed a group of 9 freshman Republicans here in the district over in the Tucson area. You know, a lot of these freshmen they ran on the border, they won on the issue of the border, but some of them had never been to the border. So we're talking states up north and northeast. And so brought him down to meet with border agents and also see the trade and the commerce that happens at the border, look at the immigration side, because I always talk about the border in the way that we have to understand that it's got immigration going on, it's got trade, commerce, and tourism, and it's got security as well. And people convolute those all the time, and they mix them, and they try to solve one with issues of the other. So we got to make sure that they simultaneously exist, and we can address them all at the same time in a different approach on each one. So on the security side, though, as we were meeting with the Border Patrol agents with CBP, it was clear to them that the numbers had dipped. I went to facilities where it was busting at the seams before with overcapacity. Now there wasn't one soul in there. All that is great, and they know it. However, they also know that the Mexican drug cartels are not going to walk away from a multi-billion-dollar enterprise and then just say, we're going to go, shift business somewhere else and do something else. They're regrouping, and what we're expecting them to do is to use technology and to start becoming more and more violent and more lethal on our side of the border. So they're getting ready for that. This is why the reconciliation conversation is so important, and that's why border security and funding for that continues to be on top of my priority list. As I mentioned, I serve on the Appropriations Committee. I'm now not a member of the Homeland Security Appropriations Committee, and I'm the vice chair of that subcommittee. So I have direct say on the funding that will go to border security, Homeland overall, which includes TSA, Secret Service, Coast Guard, and other parts of agencies as well. But we have to continue to prioritize it because although the numbers have dipped, they are regrouping. And you're looking at drone technology. There have been multiple reports in Spanish, actually Spanish media has covered this, of these drone operators being trained on the Mexico side to come over our side and do from either monitoring, investigating, but even dropping explosive devices into our side of the border. So the threat is still real, and that's why it's not a thing that we can just check off and say, done. A lot has been done, and the president, quite frankly, alone on this, because no law has actually changed, he's been able to unilaterally change the situation at the border, but the fight there is not over. So my constituents feel a great sense of relief on this. Our agents do as well, but we have to remain alert on this and know that the threat is not over yet, and there's a lot of work still to be done.
Congressman Biggs, let me ask you this question, because you were here when 1070 happened. You were here when the states felt like the federal government had abandoned them, and they started taking matters into their own hands, passing bills like 1070. And even, last ballot initiative, this state legislature passed another measure, allowing for enforcement of, you would argue, traditionally federal immigration laws. But yet no blowback. It seems like the world has changed, that, people are much more supportive of everyone being stricter and secure on the border. What do you think has changed since you've been around for both kind of sides of that?
20 million illegal aliens in 4 years. That's what drives the change. And the bottom line is SB 1070, even after it came back from the Supreme Court said you could still inquire if you had reasonable suspicion. So even it was always mischaracterized, 1070, but that part survived. And what's gone on is we've had 100,000 fentanyl deaths a year over that same period of time. You have just an absolute awareness. You've had high-profile crimes committed by those who are in the country illegally. People are aware of that. And then you had just generic crime rates increase. Whether that's related to it or not, that's anybody's opinion. But the bottom line is, when you had that influx coming across, you could see it. So now when you have 200 or so encounters a day, I used to take lots of members of Congress down. There were times when I was standing in a group of 200 illegal aliens who had just crossed the border, and me and one Border Patrol agent, because there are no Border Patrol agents left because they were all attending facilities. So the distinction is that's what drove it. And if you want to know a reason why President Trump is in the White House today, that's it. And if you want to know what fixed it, it wasn't the promise of more legislation. It was the promise of enforcing the border simply by telling your agents, we're going to allow you to enforce the law. And that's what's happened. And immediately, I look at some Spanish language news as well. You could see immediately the cartels were discombobulated. They were at first they doubled the price from 2 weeks before Trump was elected. It was $5,000 per. Then it became $10,000 about a week after Trump was elected when I went down to the border. The bottom line is this. That's what drove the election. That's what drove people to become aware. The numbers were so massive, they were off the charts. And quite frankly, I think it took a while for people to believe that that was the case. But then it didn't spread. It didn't stay in Arizona or Texas. It spread throughout the country, and everybody saw the impacts of fentanyl, and everybody saw the numbers. And that's what drove it, in my opinion, Danny. That's a marked change. And so when the legislature did their bill earlier this week, by the way, it was purely consistent with 18 U.S.C. 2331. It's just totally consistent with that. And the bottom line is, that's what Americans believe is happening. That's what they believe should be happening. And that's the distinction, I think, between having been in the 1070 years and lived. I think who boycotted? All the artists boycotted. It was interesting to me.
That would be a great way to end. I know I'm getting the hook saying we got to wrap up to get to the Senate panel, but I want to give each of you an opportunity. I always ask this question of our business leaders, what's keeping you up at night? But since you have the House, you have the Senate, you have the White House, maybe say either what you're excited about what's to come, or anything that's still keeping you up at night. Just start with Congressman Hamadeh and go down, and we'll wrap on that note.
What keeps me up at night is the communist Chinese. I think they're emboldened right now, and I know there's a reason why we have TSMC and so much of this foreign investments coming into Arizona. We have to make sure that we are innovating our defense industrial bases, keeping up with the times. I feel like too often we're operating as a Ford Motor Company of the 1940s when we need to operate as the Apple of 2025. So we have to keep up with this new world of AI. Whoever predicted this coming right now. So communist Chinese, they are doing a masterful job, but we have to counteract them. And it requires not just the government, but also all of you in the business community as well.
I want to clap for that one personally. I thought it was well said. Yeah, Congressman Crane, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to Abe's point, that the Chinese Communist Party is definitely something I'm concerned about. But I think the biggest thing I'm concerned about is our inability in Washington, D.C. to rein in the out-of-control spending. I think Congressman Biggs talked about it a second ago. We're about $37 trillion in debt. We're spending about $2 trillion a year more than we bring in. I was actually in Florida a couple months ago talking to a PhD in economics that worked for President Trump in his first term. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I've always wondered, all right, what's the tipping point? What's the magic number that we're going to hit where this house of cards is finally going to collapse? Because no country in the history of the world has been able to do what we're doing over a sustained period of time. He told us that we have about $17 trillion left in debt cap before we can no longer sell our bonds. He said if you guys extend the Trump tax cuts at the end of the year, which I assume you will, and I think most of us up here plan on doing, he said that number goes down to $12 trillion. So if you take that number, 12 million, or you know, 12 trillion, you divide it by 2, which is the annual deficit that we're running, you have about 6 years left. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of appetite in Washington, D.C. to cut spending. And as a father and somebody who served this country and loves this country, I think that's what concerns me the most, economic calamity.
Congressman Ciscomani.
Well, Danny, you're right. I mean, when you look at what we have the Republicans have the House, we have the Senate, and we have the White House, of course. That comes with a responsibility to govern. It's nice to say that we've got all three, but now we have to deliver on the promises that we all ran on. And when we have such a slim majority in the House, and even in the Senate, because you need 60 votes there, then it becomes a tricky situation. And when you look at the opportunity that we have in reconciliation, it was mentioned on the tax cuts, for example. If we don't do something about that, we're going to see the highest tax increase that we've ever seen in the history of our nation. So you've got that. You've got the responsibility to still tackle the border situation. We, of course, have, as it was mentioned, the Chinese Party and what they're up to and the technology that they use. As a vice chair of Homeland Security Committee and Appropriations, I get classified briefings on some of the cyber threats that we're facing. And on top of that list is always this problem of the Chinese Communist government. So all these things are piling on, and we have here an opportunity to actually do something about it. We're going to have to do a lot of negotiating and a lot of discussion, obviously, among ourselves and with our colleagues to make sure that we deliver on the promises that we ran on. So it's really delivering on what we ran on and making sure that we get this country back in fiscal order, in our safety. I think that keeps us all up at night. On top of the economy, that is the number one issue that I hear all the time. It was one of the biggest issues in the election, last election as well, as it is today. As a dad of 6, what keeps me up at night, kids do often, yes, that's the case, the schedule for the next day, but also what's their future and what does that hold for them? So when we look at the economy, the affordability of things, people being able to buy their first home, and the American dream still being attainable to people that want a shot at it, those are the kind of things that get all wrapped up and say, how can we make sure that we continue to do what's necessary to be done to give opportunity to the people and keep that American dream alive? So it's a combination of all this, and I do think a big step can happen here during the next 4 weeks of reconciliation when we go back next week and spend the next 4 weeks all the way up to Memorial Day on this issue.
So yesterday I got to meet with a couple of school groups, 7th and 8th graders in one school, and all of their questions I thought were very interesting because they get at what keeps me up at night. They were asking me, what is going to happen for my future based on the national debt? Now I'm paraphrasing, but that's what they were asking. Is there going to be an economic future for me? Will I be able to get a job? Will I be able to live the life that I dream of with the current fiscal problems that we have? Now, again, I'm paraphrasing what they said, but that was the nub of the question. And it was repeated multiple times. That's what keeps me up at night, because you cannot perpetuate what we are doing and just hope to grow your way out of it. We're gonna give some fudge. There's going to be a fudge factor in both of those reconciliation packages coming to the House and the Senate, because you're going to give yourself a growth rate over 10 years, sustainable, which we haven't done in decades. So we're going to disguise it again just a little bit. And that's the problem. We have got to talk turkey and admit we have a massive spending problem. And we have to deal with that. That's what keeps me up at night, because in a bipartisan fashion for the last 30 years, you've had repeated statements by leaders in the national security area who said our biggest threat is our own national spending crisis. Because at some point, we can't sell our bonds. At some point, we cannot finance our government, which means we cannot finance our military, which means we cannot finance our defense, which means we are vulnerable in every way. That keeps me up.
Well, thank you so much. On that bright note, please give them all a round of applause for being here with us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're up there, yeah.
Again, thank you to Representatives Biggs, Ciscomani, Crane, and Hamadeh for that insightful discussion and for taking time to be here today. They're all very busy. It's now my pleasure to introduce Sarah Cooney, Honeywell Vice President for Defense Americas. Honeywell is a global leader in automation, aerospace, and energy technologies with more than 80 years in Arizona and over 7,000 employees statewide. Honeywell continues to fuel growth and innovation across our region. We're proud to partner with them, and we look forward to many more years of advancing the aerospace sector right here in Arizona. Please join me in welcoming Sarah to the stage.
Good afternoon. As stated, I'm Sarah Cooney and the Vice President for Honeywell Aerospace for Defense Americas, and that actually means that my team is responsible for the business direct to the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. For decades, Honeywell Aerospace has been a pillar of Arizona's innovation economy, advancing aerospace technology and making significant contributions to our state and nation. With major facilities across the valley and in Tucson, Honeywell drives economic growth by creating thousands of high-skilled jobs and pioneering cutting-edge avionics, propulsion systems, and sustainable aviation solutions. From Arizona, our technologies power critical defense platforms, enhance commercial aviation safety, and support NASA's space exploration missions, cementing our state's leadership in America's aerospace and defense sectors. This growth is fueled by a strong congressional delegation, championing policies that foster innovation and opportunity. It is with great pride in Arizona's contributions that we turn to today's panel discussion to explore federal policies shaping our economy and empowering our job creators. We're honored to welcome two distinguished leaders, Senator Mark Kelly and Senator Ruben Gallego, whose unwavering advocacy in Washington strengthens industries like aerospace and drives prosperity for Arizona. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Senators Kelly and Gallego as they take the stage for this vital conversation.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for being here. I know you're busy. We really appreciate the opportunity to get together and talk. But let's go ahead and start with an issue you both have been doing town halls about. You heard me ask Congressman Ciscomani about it a little bit earlier, and that is Medicaid, and more specifically, the impact on our state. And I'll start with the senior senator, Senator Mark Kelly, on this one.
Yeah, Medicaid is the foundation, one of the foundations of our healthcare system here in Arizona. People often think that there's a healthcare system for people on Medicaid, Medicare, private payer, private insurance. It's one system. And when you drastically cut the number of people on Medicaid, that affects all of us. Make no mistake, if this happens, this will have an impact on everybody. And I think what's notable about this is being done, potentially, hasn't happened yet, to be able to provide some room in the budget to give an extension of the Trump tax cuts from 2017, which by and large is a big tax cut for the wealthiest Americans. So that's the reason that they are looking at this part of the budget under the House Energy and Commerce Committee, $880 billion. I think what Congressman Andy Biggs mentioned is very instructive. He talked about this thing called FMAP. That's the federal matching that goes towards Medicaid payments, so money that comes to Arizona. He said it would be leveled out at 70%. What he didn't mention is that under Arizona law, when we expanded the population, I think it was in 2000, and then again in 2013, that if the FMAP number goes below 80%, 500,000 people, the entire expansion population gets kicked off of Medicaid. That would have a devastating impact on our entire healthcare system. So you heard it here first from Congressman Biggs that it sounds like their plan is to put that number at 70%. Under Arizona law, that means we would lose the expansion population. This includes kids, disabled folks, folks that are also on Medicare. It would be devastating to our healthcare system, also devastating to our economy.
No, perfect segue to Senator Gallego, because you were here for this. Also under Arizona law, if that were to happen, we took a vote, and the people of Arizona now have mandated that a certain percentage of those folks be covered. So that burden will definitely fall to the state, correct?
Yeah, hello. Okay, well, when we wrote the 2013 law, and I was lucky enough to be in that group that negotiated with Governor Jan Brewer and Republicans, we specifically put it at 80%, right? And that was a compromise, and I think it was a decent compromise that our Republican colleagues told us, like, we don't trust that the rug's not going to be pulled from out of us later on, and we're going to end up holding this amount of liabilities in terms of coverage. And so that was a negotiated amount. Now, what's going to happen is by pulling that number down to 70%, the match that comes from our assessments to hospitals goes away, which then means the drawdown for the federal government goes away. And it's not just us. There are about 11 to 20 states that also have the same amount. So they're going to end up de facto being able to save billions and billions of dollars. And again, they're doing it essentially to give a tax cut. Not necessarily because we have an existential threat, and we do, I think, when it comes to debt limit, but because they want to continue to be able to push further on tax cuts. Now, I've had a big emphasis on my town halls in rural Arizona, because I think everyone thinks about Medicaid and the Medicaid expansion population as being entirely urban focused. In some regards, it is important that we do that, of course. We have some very great hospital systems that are doing cutting-edge work that take care of a lot of our populations here, but 33% of rural Arizona is on Medicaid. If you cut that expansion, you will end up be cutting most of rural red Arizona, Trump America Arizona. You will see rural hospitals shutting down their emergency rooms, and you'll force families to go to Tucson, driving to Yuma, driving to Flagstaff, or driving to Maricopa County in order for them to get emergency services. You'll end up seeing the cost of everything going up because premiums will go up for everyone else because, again, as my senior senator said, this is one big healthcare system. It's not like we could chop out an MRI or the doctor or anesthesiologist by how much they're being paid or cut by Medicaid. So we're going to end up seeing our hospital systems closed. We're going to end up seeing a rationing of services. You're going to see doctors and specialists leave the state. And we already are in a deficit, by the way. For our hospital systems, they'll tell you, we already are in a deficit in terms of resident spots and doctors. So this is a bad public health outcome, but also for the economy, it is a horrible outcome for us, too, as a state, who have a very thriving economy that has a big push on the sector, on the healthcare sector, too.
In the Chamber Foundation, as I mentioned earlier, did commission a study to show the overall impact on the economy. It's not just about healthcare costs, it's what happens next. It drives costs up for all the private employers. It drives wait times and availability up for everyone. So if we agree there's a lot of problems with trying to change the FMAP or trying to cut Medicaid, what do we do about this deficit that you heard 4 of your colleagues in the House say is keeping them up at night?
Yeah, it keeps me up at night too, and I get it. $2.1, $2.2 trillion a year. That's not sustainable. I would say if you're running a business, you're going to look at the revenue and the expense side. You're going to look at folks in this room certainly do this probably every single day. If you're running a business, how much money are you taking in? How much is going out? And that's why I find it so hard to understand why you would want to give a giant tax cut again to the wealthiest Americans. I think Congressman Crane pointed out, he said, based on the economists that he talked to, we've got about $17 trillion in debt room before folks stop buying our bonds. Well, a lot of folks stopped buying the bonds because of the tariff issue recently and what's happening in the U.S. economy. So that's a big problem. But he said about $17 trillion. Then I think you probably heard what he said next, and that is that this tax cut brings that number down to $12 trillion. and you divide 12 by 2, you get 6 years. So of course I'm concerned with that. We've got to figure out ways to balance the budget. But I will tell you that kicking a bunch of people off of their health care in the state of Arizona, which, by the way, these folks are going to have to get health care anyway, and it's going to become more expensive, and it's going to be more of a drag on our Arizona economy, and Arizona is going to have to pay for this instead of the federal government. We've got to find more efficiencies in government. We've got to raise more revenue, and we've got to cut the budget. But we've got to be smart about where we do it. And, certainly having an unelected, billionaire run rampant through the federal bureaucracy and just randomly fire people and damage these institutions is not a thoughtful, process-focused way of doing this.
No, thank you. And I'm glad you brought that up. I did want to suggest that we are able to operate on deficits because of things like a trade deficit, which makes the dollar the world's reserve currency. But that all could be changing.
Now.
Yeah, that all could be changing if we keep it up. So yeah, with that, how would you solve the deficit, Senator Gallego, as a junior senator?
All right, well, I have a PowerPoint for this, actually. No, look, it is, number one, let's take for a fact what's happening. This reconciliation bill has nothing to do with deficit reduction. They've never claimed it to be a deficit reduction bill. All they've said is we're going to cut Medicaid so we could afford these tax cuts. And clearly, they just told you, it's not me and Mark telling you, that it's going to add more to the deficit. So the first rule, if you ever go to a doctor and saying, wow, this hurts, should I keep doing it? The doctor says, stop doing that. Well, stop doing that then, right? Number one. Number two, look, there's going to have to be smart cuts, and I think there's a lot of smart cuts that you can do all across government to bring down our deficit and in expenditures. Number two, you have to have some tax increase or stop tax cuts that will also fill that hole. GDP growth also matters. And when we're actively having an administration that is truly affecting GDP growth and then making assessments about how much they could afford their tax cuts based on a GDP growth that doesn't exist, and they all just agree to it, by the way, right now. You just saw them saying, well, that GDP growth is illusionary, but we're still going to end up voting for it. I mean, like, hello, are we all just blind or deaf? So why not actually work on real GDP growth? So the way you start having real GDP growth is, number one, stop getting in stupid trade wars, right? I was just in Europe, and I was talking to some of our best trade partners, some of them that actually send billions of dollars worth of goods here to the United States and that we buy from them. And they're talking about right now trying to figure out how to diversify their economy away from us, right? Just a 10%, for example, just if we do a 10% tariff on Europe, specifically Germany and Netherlands, it's going to cost, specifically, our TSMC plant, about $20 million just for one operating machine. And that's just for that machine, not considering all the other costs end up happening. So focusing on GDP growth, which is figuring out how to maybe streamline regulations, permitting reform matters, immigration matters too. If we have a stable immigration flow of workers here, we'd also have GDP growth. All those are three things will actually bring us down into becoming at least closer to deficit neutral. Now, the debt is a big issue, but the debt is something that we're going to have to handle over time. But if we can get ourselves to deficit neutrality, then I think that will actually stabilize the bond market. If we stabilize the bond market, then our bonds will actually end up being cheaper, at least for us in terms of our interest rates, and then we could afford over time paying down everything. So I don't want us to get really wrapped up in this idea of the debt, because the deficit is what you have to deal with. It's like essentially focusing on making sure you're making enough money to pay the mortgage payment, not necessarily paying off the 30-year mortgage. I think that's a smarter way for us to do it. And then in terms of policy aspects, it's easier for us to attain as a country.
Even beyond debt to GDP ratio, it's net interest on the debt compared to the size of the economy is what we really need to be focused on. And by the way, I think everybody in here realizes the economy was growing. It was growing rather rapidly until about a month or so ago. And now we're faced with, most economists say, that we are risking a recession here.
I was going to say, I know tariffs are in here. I'm supposed to they seem to be woven into every question that we're talking about right now. But I think it's important for those of us who just spent 30% more in our Easter baskets as we're paying for chocolate from overseas.
Yeah.
So I understand why we're talking about it. But let's talk about an area of agreement really fast, and we'll come back to tariffs. Because if the stated goal is to make things here and to create supply chains here, we're going to need, power. We're going to need smelters, aluminum, steel, et cetera, et cetera. And you two have kind of a rare trivia fact. You were two Democrat members of the Senate to vote to confirm a Trump cabinet pick in that of Lee Zeldin, who recently came out.
Many of them. It wasn't just that one.
Yeah. Where both of you were, the state to have both their opposite party people, vote to confirm. I think it was a rare thing. So could you talk to me about that? What did you see in Administrator Zeldin, and you, Senator Kelly, helped bring him out here, and you led if anyone wants to feel good about government doing its job and being a place where people can come together and solve problems, they were in that EPA meeting that you led for us.
Yeah, well, I voted to confirm him because with this administration and them putting Lee forth, and after my meeting with him, I realized that he's a guy we could actually work with. And we have some very specific and unique problems here in the state of Arizona that I think don't really exist anywhere else, and the problem is the ground level ozone. We can get into more details about that if you want. And
I've learned not to do that with a rocket scientist, so no, I don't want to be asked a question again about particulate matter in space.
Well, I mean, the problem we face is one we don't really understand, and we need the EPA to work on this to make sure that we can get cleaner air, specifically here in Maricopa County. We've had emissions going down for decades, and ground level ozone has been going up. And Eli Crane alluded to where the problem probably resides, and that's the wildfire issue in northern Arizona creates volatile organic compounds, combines with nitrous oxide, makes ozone. Ground level ozone.
Scientists in this group.
So we've got emissions going this way, and we got ozone going up, and we have companies that want to come here. And when we go from like moderate non-attainment on ozone to serious non-attainment, which we were at risk of going to, and that's the thing we worked with Administrator Zeldin on, is then companies have to find emission credits in order to get permits to build their facilities. The problem we face in Arizona is we are not like Pennsylvania or Ohio that have factories that shut down that then create credits that are put into a credit bank that other companies can buy. That doesn't exist here. So we've had to find another way to produce these credits even when we're in the moderate non-attainment. And that's what I got the commitment from Lee Zeldin to work on, is coming up with this, and it's electrifying truck stations and fleets. And we can solve this problem. Now at the same time, got a commitment from him to make sure that his scientists and the experts are focused on figuring out what's going on here, and because we can't let this ozone to continue to go up at the same time we need a growing economy. So we're going to solve the credit problem. We're going to probably stay out of serious non-attainment, and we're going to get the scientists focused on how do we bring down our ozone.
Yeah, and just without going into the scientific background, because I'm a liberal arts major, so
it means a lot to the people in this room. So thank you, Senator
That
Kelly.
meant something to somebody. We have a responsibility to govern, and Arizona is a state that is owned 65% by the federal government, and so whether it's voting for the head of the Department of Interior, Secretary of Energy, head of EPA, we still have to figure out a way to get things done. A lot of these, I would say, East Coast or even West Coast Democrats, for example, are in states that can literally just ignore the federal government. If we ignore the federal government, or the federal government decides to have an antagonistic relationship to Arizona, we suffer, right? If you look at our tribal governments, we have 22 federally recognized tribes here. They're entirely dependent on us having a good relationship with the Department of Interior. And when I say entire good relationship, they could shut off water, they can shut off road repairs, construction, infrastructure, energy. So we need to have an ability to be able to call the Secretary of Interior and say, like, hey, what's going on here? Which I actually, to credit of Secretary of Interior Bergman, we've actually have had that opportunity. He has been very helpful on occasions where things have popped up. we can't have the luxury of a lot of these other Democrats where we can just ignore the administration, because Arizona would suffer. Just even on the IRA side, for example, we are one of the net beneficiaries of the IRA, of the CHIPS Act, all these things. So while we are going to be the loyal opposition, while we're going to fight Trump in the areas that we need to be fighting Trump, most importantly, we're going to be fighting for Arizona, right? Because that's what we were voted in to do. And sometimes that's going to require us to take some sticky votes that's going to piss off our base. It's happened. But at the end of the day, if our base is going to be very happy when people are employed, when our Native American communities are taken care of, and other very important government functions are taken care of, because we at least try to have a good relationship in terms of a governance relationship with this administration.
Both of you are vets, and when we talk about bringing semiconductors here, TSMC, you've heard it quoted multiple times as the most important company in the world right now. I hear you, in particular, Senator Kelly, and Senator Gallego has done this as well, talk about what it means to national security. Can you explain that to the crowd? Why is it so important that this is successful, that companies like TSMC have success here?
Yeah, one of our House members said that Arizona is now the world capital for semiconductor production. We're not there yet. I think we can get there. The problem we face is that the capital on the planet that makes semiconductor chips that we need is on Taiwan. The TSMC capacity on this island that's 90 miles away from mainland China is constantly at risk. Still today, if we lose access to those semiconductor chips on Taiwan in a year or possibly even less, we would lose 10% of our GDP. Folks don't realize that, just without having access to those chips. So if there was a conflict in the Western Pacific and China decides they're going to take Taiwan, we lose access to the chips, our economy is screwed. And it's not only that issue, it's the other issue is with shipping. They control basically the world's merchant fleet. I'm trying to fix this with something similar to the Chips and Science Act. So the Chips and Science Act, to me, it's not only about great paying jobs here in Arizona, that's an ancillary benefit to it. But it is a national security imperative that we build the best semiconductor chips on U.S. soil. Now, we were able to convince TSMC, and I think Eli Crane mentioned that, or Abe Hamadeh mentioned that this was the first Trump administration that did this. Well, I'll give him some credit. Wilbur Ross wrote a letter to TSMC. So it did start during the first Trump administration. But it was Democrats and Republicans in the Senate working together on the Chips and Science Act that actually made this happen. So myself and my colleagues, and then in the House with Ruben and his colleagues on both sides of the aisle, bipartisan legislation supporting our economy and our national security. So we've got to get these eventually six fabs up here running, that combined with the Intel footprint here in Arizona, and I think we will arguably be the world's capital for semiconductor production, and we will be a safer nation because of it.
Yeah, and look, we saw this during COVID. If you remember during COVID, the prices of certain electronics went up. And so, if you need a dishwasher or a car during COVID, the price of that went up because what happened was, with the limited amount of chips that were coming in, we're moving our chips to be used on medical devices and not on consumer devices. And by the time the lag was caught up, it had been it had taken too long. And that's where you saw inflation in regard to that. But just on a kind of pure tactical level, the battlefield of tomorrow, literally the battlefield of tomorrow, is going to be robotic. The human to human kinetic interaction that he and I, quote unquote, grew up in the world, when I fought my war and he fought his war, is going to be less and less. And right now, if you actually read some of the studies, both classified and unclassified, what's coming out of Ukraine, there are more and more battles happening right now on the Ukrainian front that have zero actual human interaction. It's about who can knock out whose drone in the fastest manner possible. Those all require chips. And the place and the country that can do and produce chips faster, cheaper, and put it into a faster and cheaper weapon, an automated weapon, is going to be the superpower of the world. that is all dependent on us being able to produce that. If our chips are entirely dependent on a 2-week voyage through torpedoes, landmines, and potentially other problems, we're going to be in such a detrimental state that we will not be able even to get into a fight. So this is why having chips being made in the United States domestically, and the secondary thing that has to happen to that, we also have to have the long supply chain entail that comes with that. So right now, I'll tell you a really good example. I was just actually at TSMC this morning. It's great we're building it here. 90% of the chemicals and gas that they need to build these chips still come from Taiwan. So the tariffs are actually adding an extra cost onto TSMC for our American-made chips. And that's actually costing, again, lag time. It's costing the consumer even more. It's making people question about, again, the durability of the American economy as well as our word. These are the things we have to really take into account. So when these guys are up here talking about, bringing things home and making sure we're, that we're a solid country when it comes to our industrial policy, tariffs and tariff policy, incorrectly done, puts that at in a very detrimental situation.
I'm getting the notes from your staff that it's time to wrap up. So I don't want to get in too much trouble, but we haven't really got a chance to address tariffs directly. So I kind of want to end on that subject. Yeah, let's take it head on. You both are veterans. You've both served in conflict. You know how the world views us and how we're viewed by our allies. How do you see this tariff fight ending? What's the end in sight? Make an honest prediction for us if you can. I know it's changed. It's probably changed since I asked that sentence with the rate that we're going, which is tough for business.
That's why it's hard to predict. I mean, every day it's something else. It's tariffs on, off, 145%, 25%. I mean, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? I actually feel a little bad for my Republican colleagues that were up here that have to defend this. I mean, some of them had to change their entire thinking about free trade to defend the president. And his trade policy comes from Peter Navarro because Jared Kushner found a book by Peter Navarro on Amazon. And in that book, there is a made-up economist. That's the trade policy we are currently living under. I'm not making this stuff up. So it is chaotic. It's damaging to our economy. You can see it in the stock market, but the scarier part is what's happening in the bond market and what's happening to the dollar. I just hope that the president realized that this was not well thought out, that he is getting bad advice from his top trade advisor, which is Peter Navarro, and he changes course. It's not too late. Eventually, if this goes on with this kind of unpredictability, it is going to continue to damage our relationships with our best trading partners, with our allies, and we will be cast aside, and they will go other places. And that is going to be a drag on all your businesses and on our economy. So I think there's still time to get this back on track. I just hope the president makes some smart decisions here.
So it sounds like we're pinning our hopes on President Trump's administration willingness to admit a mistake, which is not very encouraging.
So
you go ahead and take
my
away.
theory, he's just going to declare victory at some point. He's going to declare victory. He's going to point at like a bunch of factory jobs that we're going to open up anyway. Like, I won, it's over. And guess what? We should all just let it go, right? Because it's better for the economy. There's going to be some countries that will strike deals. We'll strike a deal with Vietnam, and we'll drop our tariffs to 0%, so they'll finally buy all of our vehicles because they were going to do that before. So that's going to happen. I think the problem is that we have permanently put a stain on American capitalism. I think people are going to question whether they should be in contracts with American companies. And I've already heard this from overseas companies. They're looking for other partners, right? A good example in Colombia, they buy most of their soybeans from the United States. Brazil, the largest producer of soybeans, is right next to them. They could literally buy cheaper soybeans from Brazil, but they have chosen to buy it from the United States. Right now, because of the chaos that's being caused by this, a lot of Brazilian producers are thinking of just buying from Brazil because they actually have a a steady source. And I think, going to Germany and London this last week, talking to businessmen and economic ministers over there, they felt like they were just, a bride left at the altar, because they just had no idea what's going on here. They don't know who to actually talk to. They don't know who to negotiate with. And they consistently ask, like, so what is it that you actually want? Because we're your partner. We want to work with you. Germany's biggest export is the United States. They've been purposely trying to decouple from China. And now, talking to the acting economic minister of Germany, the top CEOs of Germany are talking to their foreign minister, saying, like, well, we need to find our markets. And so now they're trying to reorient themselves back to China. So all the work that we've been trying to do to create this, I would say, coalition of liberal economic democracies to be able to join together to push against the big Chinese economic threat that's coming in the future is not at risk, because we basically have told them, like, yeah, we're not actually that close, right? So this is not going to end up working as well as I think the president had thought. There's the long-term implications of this is for us to have longer economic insecurity, a slowing economy, slower GDP growth, and at the end of the day, whether it's your 401k, your Roth IRA, but when we slow down this economy, everyday working class people are the ones going to be hurt, because that means higher unemployment and lower wages, and I fear, because we're talking about the bond market, at the same time, higher inflation. So getting back to a place in time called stagflation. I wasn't born yet when that happened. My senior senator was, so he has to explain to me what happened back in the day. Thank God for that experience for him.
I was a little kid.
Just kidding. But this is something that I don't think the American public has ever really dealt with. And, we had the shock that the American psyche dealt with for the 4 years of high inflation will be nothing compared to what happens when the American psyche has to deal with stagflation. It's something that I don't think we're really ready to deal with the implications of.
Okay, well, before Ali cuts me off and plays the music, I'm going to say one thing. I want you, as a senior senator, which has been pointed out multiple times, to just close this out, hopefully with a note of hope. But I'll tell you, it's my hope that your colleagues in the Senate will not abandon 92 years of understanding of what happens with tariffs and all speak out and eventually help put this to an end and give our businesses some certainty going forward. But I will give you the last word, Senator Mark Kelly, as Senior Senator for Arizona.
Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. And we talked a lot about, some stuff that's kind of a little bit depressing and we've got to fix. I would say on the positive side, we are the most innovative company or country that has the best scientists, the best engineers, the best technology. We're still creating that technology here. Whether it's AI or quantum computing, these technologies are going to help grow our economy and drive it into the future, and I am incredibly bullish on America.
You can't end on a better note than that. Please give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Before we wrap, I want to once again thank our presenting sponsor, SRP, along with the other organizations who made this event possible. And I'm going to go sans teleprompter because it's frozen. And of course, a huge thank you to our special guests and panelists, Senators Kelly, Gallego, Representatives Biggs, Ciscomani, Crane, and Abe Hamadeh. We truly appreciate you all for making time to be here today and share your insights with us. To all of our chamber members, to all of our guests, thank you for joining us. We're grateful for what you do, for making it so these events can happen. These are important conversations. Let's keep Arizona growing, competitive, resilient, and let's keep our power on with SRP. Thanks again. Enjoy the rest of the day.